Hi guys. My name is Paula Croxson, and I have the worst hangovers in the world. The worst. They're so bad that they even have their own name. Yeah, you can't really see that because it's in red, which really negates half of my talk. The name of my hangover, never mind. The name of my hangover is the Croxson Special. It's named after me because no one else has a hangover as bad as I do. And I have been involved, as Matt said, in some very intensive research into why this is. Before we start, I would also like to do some audience polling. So first off, I'm going to have to come a little forward for this so I can see you. How many of you have drunk alcohol? Ooh, yeah, okay. Like 2. How many of you have drunk a great deal of alcohol in a single night? How many of you are drinking a great deal of alcohol right now as we speak? How many of you have had a hangover? How many of you have never had a hangover? Fuck off! I mean, seriously, just get out. I do not want to see you. For those of you who have had a hangover, you probably recognize some of these sights and feelings. Unconsciousness followed by bad consciousness. Confusion. Sensory overload. Inability to move other than your eyes. Unwillingness to move other than your eyes. Motor impairment. Cognitive impairment. And guilt. So, the scientific name for hangover is physalgia, and it's described as the unpleasant next day state following an evening of excessive alcohol consumption. From a study in the UK people, apparently it leads to only a loss of 2.3 working days per year on average, and a further 2.5 due to people coming in and then being totally useless. I mean, that's not that much, right? Never mind what I alone have done. However, there is some interest in the hangover beyond it's your own fault, mate, which is that people who are susceptible to hangovers are also at increased risk of developing alcohol dependence and alcohol abuse. And so there has been some research on hangovers, but when I started to delve into the scientific research on hangovers, there was almost none. And this is very disturbing to me as a sufferer of terrible hangovers. But let's see what I found. So a hangover, apparently, is scientifically defined as a feeling of general misery. In fact, somebody has gone far enough as to define a thing called the acute hangover scale. And the acute hangover scale was formed based on 2 groups of people: students at a maritime academy in Sweden and US college students. So you can see there's a link between those 2 groups already, right? And they described the main feelings of hangover, and these were quantified. So the size of the words on the screen here tell you how commonly it was experienced. And very helpfully, the most common symptom of having a hangover is the feeling of hangover. Thanks, mariners and students, for your insight. But then, there was also the feeling of being thirsty, having a headache, being tired, having dizziness or faintness, and then to a lesser extent loss of appetite, stomachache, nausea, and a racing heart. So these are symptoms probably are familiar to many of you. Now here's what the symptoms of my hangover look like. From 7 a.m. until 7 p.m. when I finally fall asleep from exhaustion, my hangover consists of vomiting. So I'll tell you. So I'm a scientist. So I wanted to know, why are my hangovers so bad? What is this scientific basis for this horrible, horrible thing that happens to me? And also the point, why are my hangovers so bad that other people with hangovers can be smug at me while I'm having a hangover? So I discovered that there were 4 main possibilities for the awfulness of my hangover. So let's start with impurities. And I should say, the motivation for this research is thus. The main way to prevent a hangover is to stop drinking. But that's obviously not going to happen. Thank you. So these are the alternatives. So one possibility is it's not the alcohol at all. It's the impurities that are present in my alcoholic beverages. Well, it turns out that this has been a subject of research. So these things called congeners are present in many alcoholic drinks, and they're defined as organic compounds that provide taste to your drink. So the more strong a taste your drink has, the more congeners it has in it. So you can see that at the top there are things like brandy and red wine and rum and whiskey, and then at the bottom there are things like gin and vodka and beer. And the most popular drink used in the scientific studies, a mixture of ethanol and orange juice. So, I can just tell you now that I did not try ethanol and orange juice. But I did undertake some extensive personal research to see if this was consistent with my own condition.
How strong is the correlation?
I don't remember. I think I was drunk when I read it, but I can look it up for you later. So this scale is called the Congener Hangover Scale. I'm going to call mine the Croxson Special Scale. And there are no correlations here because it's an N of 1. And in some cases, there was only one trial because no way was I going back to that drink. I can tell you the top and the bottom already. So my worst drink is red wine, which is pretty similar to the Congener scale. But my best drink is whiskey, if anyone's buying after the show. If you bring me red wine, I will punch you. I then proceeded to try, over the last several years, a number of other drinks. I tried champagne. Very good, also, if you're buying after the show. I tried my favorite drink and staple, white wine. Also very good. Vodka-based drinks like this delicious Smirnoff Ice. Not so bad. Beer, middling. I have been known to have a Croxson Special after 1 pint of Stella, so. Gin and tonic. Difficult to calibrate because of the sheer number of these that I drink once I get going. Weird free drinks given to me on St. Patrick's Day and other holidays. And really any other random spirits that are lying around. But especially tequila. As you can see from this scientific investigation, my scale looks nothing like the Congener scale. So something else is going on here. Perhaps it's dehydration. As you all know, we're supposed to drink water during and after, and probably instead of drinking alcohol. And it is true that alcohol lowers vasopressin, which is chemical in your kidneys that allows you to retain water. And so if the levels are lower, then you will pee more, and you probably know about breaking the seal and how that goes. And it may have some after effects. So when I delved into this, there actually didn't seem to be that many clear after effects caused by dehydration. And one of them might be motor coordination. And this is the only animal study that I give any credence to. And I think the reason there are not a lot of animal studies in the field of hangover is that it's mostly our fault. But this one was related to whether alcohol dependence was an issue, and so it was considered to be very important. And in this study, what they did is they painted the front feet of mice red and the back feet of mice blue. I tried to find a video of this, but I could not. And then they have them walk down a white piece of paper. It's very high tech. And then they see how coordinated they are. So what you can see on the left in the control condition is that the mouse is coordinated. Its back and front feet fall in the same place. On the right, the hungover mice. These mice have no alcohol left in their system. That's part of the definition of a hangover study. And it's part of the reason why about 50% of the hangover studies are completely useless to me in my extensive research, because 50% of the hangover studies don't report whether the mice or humans are still drunk or not. So these are sober, hungover mice. And as you can see, they're all over the place. So don't drive the next day, kids. So is dehydration really a problem? And could you just solve your hangover by solving dehydration? And I don't know, if you're anything like me, and maybe I post a lot on social media about hangovers, you will have been marketed to about this. This is where somebody will come round and a registered nurse will put an IV drip in your arm. It might make you feel better, but there's no scientific evidence that it will. So, I don't know, use your money, don't use your money. So, now it began to get really interesting. As I was doing my research, I realized that there's a really strong involvement of the immune system. And actually, it might send your immune system into overdrive to drink a lot of alcohol. And it seems as if these little things called cytokines might actually be changed by drinking alcohol and being in a hungover state. Cytokines are molecules that are released by cells in distress that want to recruit the rest of the immune system to their help. And so one possibility is that cytokines are being released more during the hungover state. Now that is true, but unfortunately, as I was looking into this, I found an equal number of cytokines that promoted the immune system to cytokines that suppress it. So, I don't know. There may be a link, there may not be a link, and I think that may be a source of future research, but for now, I have no idea. Finally, I stumbled on some research that was really interesting to me. And this was about the buildup of toxins. Now, some of you might know this, and I'll have to spell it out because it's in red and you can't see it. So, alcohol is broken down in a two-stage process. So firstly, it's broken down using alcohol dehydrogenase. This happens in the liver, into acetaldehyde, and then using aldehyde dehydrogenase into acetate. So this is a regular process by which alcohol is broken down. And you may know that some people, particularly of Asian descent, anybody in the audience have this?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay. So some people have this lower level of aldehyde dehydrogenase, which means that even if they have a single alcoholic drink, they'll have this thing called the alcohol flush reaction, which makes them go red, a bit puffy, they feel kind of terrible, and they don't really want to drink anymore. And if they do, they don't want to be in any photos. That should actually be a rule for drinking in general. And that's caused because they get this buildup of acetaldehyde, which is quite toxic. And actually, it's been linked to cancer as well, so there are many reasons to worry about it. And this reaction, the alcohol flush reaction, the redness that people get, is a histamine reaction. And histamine is well known as being the first stage of an allergic reaction. So it's not quite as severe, it doesn't make you go into anaphylactic shock, but it is quite bad, and it causes all of your blood vessels to expand and dilate, and it leads to redness, but also increased heart rate, swelling, nausea, and lots of unpleasant symptoms. So it's not ideal. So I thought, oh, well, could this be the reason that I have such bad hangovers? Well, no, because I've had 3 glasses of wine now and I'm not red. However, as you cannot see, in addition to the aldehyde dehydrogenase, you also need this other compound called glutathione. One of my friends referred to it as the G stuff earlier, so since you can't read it on the screen, we'll just call it the G stuff. So you need the G stuff in order to make this second part of the reaction and break things down into acetate. And it turns out that this gets depleted really quickly, so you run out of your stores relatively rapidly if you're drinking quite heavily. And so possibly overnight what's happening is that my G stuff is getting reduced, and my levels of acetaldehyde are building up, and I'm getting what I'm going to call the Croxson flush reaction. which could also be a histamine response. Now, incidentally, histamine is also in quite high levels in red wine. So when I found this, I thought, oh, right! Well, no, it turns out if you drink red wine, it doesn't matter its levels of histamine. It doesn't really change your natural levels. So it's more likely that the acetaldehyde buildup is leading to your natural histamines increasing. It's a possibility. I don't know. Anyway, so while I was kind of very scientifically assessing this and saying, well, I do know, I don't know, one of my colleagues said to me, oh, I have a friend who works in the science of the alcohol hangover, and he said that you can take a supplement to increase the G stuff, and then you won't get a hangover. Really? That's the cheer I get for that? Now, don't take glutathione because it'll get broken down in your gut and you won't be able to use it. But you can take a precursor to it called NAC, and NAC apparently gets turned into glutathione and it prevents the hangover. I have ordered some. I will let you know how it goes. It may not go well. It turns out that acetate is not as harmless as I thought it was. And I may end up, instead of the vomiting, with a headache. So watch this space. I will have to get back to you on that one. So it still seems as if the best way of preventing a hangover is to not drink alcohol at all, which we all know is ridiculous. Thank you. So what about a cure? Well, I did stumble on one scientific study. And believe me, there were a lot of studies that were not scientific and were just people's blog posts. But there was one scientific study about hangover cures. And it was, I can hear people telling me their cures, but not loudly enough for me to hear. So we'll do that afterwards. Write them down and give them to me, please. So this was a study of Dutch students who had only partaken of alcohol. And they were asked what their favourite hangover cures were. And they listed them here in order of how effective they thought they are, with 8 being the most effective and 0 being not at all effective. And it seems like commercial cures, the ones that are peddled to you on social media, were not very popular with the students. Whereas more traditional cures like water, sleeping in, a nice greasy breakfast, and painkillers were very popular. So I carefully researched each and every one of these and found that there was no scientific evidence in clinical trials that any of these cures worked except for alcohol. It turns out that the hair of the dog that bit you is a thing. So there is some science behind this, and again, there's not many studies, and don't quote me on this, but it does seem as if one of the other byproducts of alcohol breakdown is methanol, and methanol is very toxic. And if people come into a hospital with methanol poisoning, then one thing to do is to give them ethanol, which will bind to it and inactivate it. And ethanol is alcohol. So it turns out that a little hair of the dog might not do you any harm, short term. However, unfortunately, people who are prone to have a hair of the dog are also prone to drink more drinks per night out, drink more drinks per week, have more drinking days per week, in which they have more drinks per week and more drinks per night out, presumably. And they have more binge drinking days, and you know how evil binge drinking is. So I hear that some people think it's awesome, but it is also associated with the possibility of developing alcohol abuse disorder. So just be careful. Do whatever you want, but my advice is don't try this at home. Yeah. So, I've looked at the evidence, I've studied it very extensively, and I've discovered that the only real way to cure or prevent a hangover is not to drink any alcohol at all. I won't be doing that, so I will be looking like this tomorrow. Thanks very much.
Go to nerdnite.com to find a Nerd Night event near you, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for our latest presentation.